So any man who has ever shot his shot at a trans woman, whether that be through DMs, Messenger, Snapchat, in person, or email, has probably at some point in his efforts come across this word: chaser. What does it mean to be a chaser? And where does it come from? Well, basically, the word chaser is short for T chaser. Starts with T, ends with Annie, chaser. And to sum it up, I feel like the most succinct and all-encompassing answer that I've ever heard would be from the brilliant, the beautiful mother Flora Yamauchi of the House of Flora, who states it as a person who obsesses over the trans feminine body without any concern for what the girls endure or their lived experiences being tokenized. To put that simply, a chaser is basically just a person who is purely interested in trans women as a means of experimentation, thrill, or sexual excitement. Oftentimes, these kinds of guys are really fixated on genitalia and are really curious or interested in satiating their chick with a dick fantasy. In this way, they're similar to players or pickup artists who only view trans women as a means of sex and usually have no interest in actually befriending, dating, or being an ally of trans people in public for fear of being shunned by a society that habitually others trans people, pushing them in many cases to the fringes of society where they experience a number of complications that many people could never possibly imagine. Now, I'm not saying that this is the experience of all trans people, but it also is not an entirely uncommon scenario. So a lot of times when I'm speaking to men who are at some varying degree interested in trans women, they say that trans women don't want good guys, or I barely said hi, she was calling me a chaser. And I think the main thing to note here is that while you do have the right to your emotions in the interaction, it's important to also be able to uncenter yourself for a moment and think about the situation objectively. If you are attracted to this woman, you are probably not the only man whom she's ever encountered. And if several people prior to you have approached her and ultimately ended up being less than reputable guys, her discernment for men is going to soon become more rigid to save herself the time and the heartbreak of getting to know someone who ends up only wanting her for one thing and one thing only. So she could be calling you a chaser just to see how you react. Or she could be calling you a chaser because you unwittingly doing some chaser ass shit, which usually entails things like, upon discovering that she is in fact trans, immediately mentioning how much you love transgenders, or even worse, using that infamous T word. Like, if you have that word anywhere on your page, some people will probably rule you out as a chaser just from that off jump. Or how about going straight into conversations about hooking up? You know, talking about how you've always been curious to try certain sexual acts, or trying to meet at her place or to get her to come to yours, as opposed to going out somewhere to meet her, or any number of sexually invasive, disrespectful questions that make her uncomfortable and attempt to gain access to certain parts of her body that just frankly are none of your goddamn business. Now, I think that it's important to note that having these conversations are not all bad, of course, but the emphasis needs to be put on how immediately or untactfully a person brings them up upon the initial meeting. Just like you wouldn't begin chatting up a woman who is not trans by asking if she prefers clitoral stimulation to vaginal penetration, or if she's into toying or tying up. You know, some assholes might, but generally speaking, the same respect that you have for cis women needs to be extended to trans bodies as well, especially if you claim to love trans people so much. Just be a regular guy, you know, it's all good. Now, what happens if you are a guy who has genuinely done the internal work and resolved that attraction inside of yourself to a place that you feel is balanced and healthy, but you're still being met with what seems to be like a huge stop sign with the word chaser spray painted across it? As I mentioned before, in this moment, you have to uncenter yourself and realize that this person is doing this out of their own need to feel safe and comfortable, and shouldn't necessarily be instantly interpreted as an attack on your character. I mean, after all, this person barely even know you. And here they are calling you out of your name, which can admittedly be hurtful. But if you come up against this wall and she doesn't seem interested in you, as beautiful and interesting as you may think that she is, and as much as you may genuinely be offering to take her out or vying to meet her, for any number of reasons, she's shutting you down, and her decision must be respected. There's plenty of fish in the sea, and plenty of trans women as well, if you get my drift. So yeah, it does suck, but seeing as some girls will rule you out for something as simple as having more than one or two mutual friends on a social platform, I think that it doesn't always have to be this awful, hurtful thing. I mean, it's not like it takes away your privilege being a cis person or causes complications for you at your job, forcing you into dangerous sex work in order for you to survive. It's just a word that should, as Jinx once famously said to the world, be water off a duck's back. I mean, besides, is being looked at as a chaser always such a bad thing? Well, if you fetishize, tokenize, and sexualize trans people's bodies while treating them like shit, well, then obviously, yes, fuck you. But if you are someone who is just resolute in who you love, I don't think that it's such an awful thing to have a preference for trans women. And seeing how there's no monolithic answer because there are so many different people with different politics in the community, what is an absolute deal breaker for one person could be an actual plus to another. So go on doing you. At least you've done the work and knowing who you like, who you are, and being okay with that, which is more than many people can say. And I think that you deserve a little bit of credit for it. It ain't all bad. For instance, being a Black man who has been in many parts of the world, I have undoubtedly come across people in countries where Black people, let alone Black Americans, are very low in population, if existing at all. And I've met people who have very clearly wanted me for certain parts or perceived parts of my Black body, or because they're infatuated with certain parts of my culture that they imagine that all Black people represent. Now, does this mean that I'm always put off by them? Not necessarily, It depends on a lot of things, their approach, what other things we may have in common, how they look, and frankly, just how I'm feeling in that moment. And I also know many men who are far less discriminate and will, without much hesitation at all, really, take them up on their offers sometimes, irregardless of what they may be. So I say all of that to say this. Different strokes for different folks, my dude. Continue on being a good guy, but don't expect the world or any woman to literally bend over backwards for you just because of it. There's someone for everyone out there. And with enough self-reflection, empathy, and caring persistence, I'm sure there's someone for you as well. Trust.